Okay, we are recording, so welcome. I'm Edwin Rutch from the XR Empathy Circle Work Group, and this is our series that we've been doing of the XR 10 principles. And we've gone through the full 10 principles. We did one of the 11th principle, there should be one. And then we've just gone through the 3 demands, the XR 3 demands. And now there's a lot of issues around, should there be 4th demands? That's what our topic is going to be for this week as well as next week. And I just want to set the intention for this Empathy Cafe is to create a regenerative culture of empathy. And so what that means in short is that each person can openly express themselves and feel heard and understood to their satisfaction, and for that to happen mutually. And basically you can say in our empathy circles, that means you can say whatever it is that you want, and hopefully you'll be heard to your satisfaction. And we do that mutually. So it's a mutual listening. And we use the empathy circle or empathic listening process for that. And we're going to start off, we're going to go for about 2.5 hours. And we're going to start off with just a quick introduction, your name, where you're located, and maybe if you're part of XR, which XR group you're part of. So just to demonstrate that, I'm Edwin Rutch from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm part of the XR San Francisco as well as XR Empathy Circle Work Group. And Krista, would you be willing to go next?
Okay, I'm Krista Niddle. I live in Springfield, Oregon in the United States, and I'm in XR America. There's not yet a local group where I live.
Okay, Bill?
Yeah, I'm Bill Filler. I'm part of the XR Empathy Tent or Empathy Work Group, and I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Marta?
Hello, Marta in Cork in the south of Ireland. I'm part of the Empathy Circle team.
Great. And Jacek?
Hi, I'm Jacek from Poland. I'm part of XR research group, but many other groups too. There's no local group in my city.
Okay, thanks. Terry?
Unmute there. I'm Terry Rankin. I'm located in Orlando, Florida. I became a local coordinator with XR for Orlando greater metro area in March of last year. I have since, and I also coordinate a larger regional group, specifically for Christian activism in XR. And with Krista, I've changed my affiliation from the 2 groups I coordinate, from being with XR US to being with XR America. Long story there, but I won't go into it.
Well, we'd love to hear all about that. In the Empathy Circle, really, that's really a great place to share all those. To be fully heard about whatever is going on there. So, thank you.
It's pretty contentious.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
Yes.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me in the circle.
Thanks for coming, Andy.
I'm Andy. I'm from Southwest England. I'm in the local group of XR South Somerset, sorry. And I'm also part of the XR UK Buddhists group.
Okay, Katie, thanks. Katie?
Hi, yeah, I'm part of XR Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire and XR Region in the Southwest.
Okay.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Dean?
Hi, I'm Dean from Plymouth, United Kingdom, part of XR Plymouth and XR Southwest and other new little bodies.
Okay, thanks. And Maureen?
XR Ireland local group Kildare.
Great. And C. Martins?
Yeah, hi. C. Martins, middle of Utah, unaffiliated.
Okay, and Sarah? You're muted, Sarah. Are you still there?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm with the Green Party of Alameda County.
Okay, welcome. So let's see, we want to, who is not familiar with the empathy circle process? Is there someone that we need a description? Has not done it? Oh, so everybody feels comfortable with the process, so we don't really need to go into that. Okay, well, then in terms of group, can everyone stay for the full time? We're just seeing that we have 12 people. So to divide into groups, we can even either have 3 groups or 2 larger groups. And if somebody drops out, then there's going to be a very small group. So can everybody stay for the full time?
I might need to go in 2 hours. I'm not sure.
Okay, 2 hours is fine. Okay, so I don't know, Bill and Martha, what do you think? Should we have 2 larger groups or one? Any thoughts on that? I'm a little not sure. 2 larger groups or 3 small, of 4?
I don't know, for the longer time, maybe 2 larger, but Marta is much, she knows.
2, okay,
2.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think so that works. Okay, then, while I got to make the groups, maybe you could just give a quick intro, Bill, or just how to just do the process just for the video. For anybody watching this, then they'll see, and I can assign people.
Okay. Welcome to the Empathy Circle, and I'll just do a quick how-to kind of review, and for people who might be watching. The Empathy Circle consists of 3 roles, and then also the facilitator's role. To participate, you just need to know the 3 roles. So I'll go over those. The first is the speaker's role, and usually we have a time limit, and and it's usually around 5 minutes or so. The speaker then speaks about the topic or whatever's on their mind. Tip is to, you'll be speaking to a listener who will be reflecting you. So it's good when you have a lot, you go on or you have a lot of information or very complex information to pause periodically to let the active listener listen. The active listener listens to the speaker and reflects what they hear, refraining from asking questions, except maybe clarification questions, like, did you mean? But, and relating their own experience or anything like that. You'll have time when you're a speaker to respond in any way that you want, but you're just reflecting the person's feelings, values, words, things like that, and trying to be as, I guess, pure as possible. I don't know if that's the best word, but pure as possible in trying to really get what they're trying to say so they feel heard. The passive listeners kind of follow along, you react. It's usually a very stimulating conversation. And the facilitator will have a little timer, and facilitator is a participant, and they'll just try to keep you in the, there'll be various things, but we just try to keep you and give you the circle experience. And there's certain loose parameters around that, and that's the job of the facilitator. Take a look for your time. When the time is up, it's not a hard close. It's not you have to stop in the middle of a sentence, finish your thought, get a reflection, and then be ready to move on. Once the speaker is done, the active listener then becomes the speaker, chooses a new active listener, and so on and so forth. We try to get everybody involved and also talk to different people as we go along. That's anything else. Marta, Edwin, did I miss anything?
Terry had something.
Question? Yeah, Terry.
Yeah, just a clarifying question. I've only done a couple of these empathy circles, and I'm getting to feel the last one was quite wonderful, in fact. Sarah was there, others, of course, you, Edwin. But anyway, clarifying for me, this discussion today and empathy circles in general are not about arguing, debating, solving problems. This is about understanding, right?
Well, we don't. That's the goal. I think broader goal. That's certainly. But we also say you can talk about whatever you want. And so there's wide freedom with knowing that we're trying to build communicative bridges. And so, you know, certainly when things get heated, that communication can suffer. So, but sometimes people need to go there. And if they do, well, they'll be listened to.
Yeah, you can go wherever you want emotionally. It's like, and you'll be heard to your satisfaction, but in return, you got to listen to the emotions of the other person too. So it's a quid pro quo, you know. Right. So yeah. So, okay, so we have two groups. Katie will facilitate one and Bill will just be there for support. If you could record that one. Yeah. Oh, Katie, yeah.
Can I just say I'm happy not to facilitate purely because the music in my block is very loud and it's a bit distracting, and it might be too distracting for everybody else that I might have to go. I don't know if you can hear it now, can you?
No, I did hear some Okay, yeah. So Bill, do you want to facilitate that one then?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Support. And Dean, do you want to do the first one? We'll be there to support you, but you'll be doing the timekeeping. So the topic is, you know, there's a lot of contention on having a fourth demand. I mean, it's really causing almost like a civil war in XR in some cases. And should there be, you know, a fourth demand? Or should there be more demands? Why or why not? And if so, what demands, you know, would you want? And just whatever is alive for you. So you can talk about the topic of the fourth demand, but you can also always talk about whatever is up for you. Whatever, you know, you're free to talk about whatever, you know, you have energy for. We're going to have 5-minute turns, and I think that's it. I think we're ready. We're going to go for an hour and 45 minutes, actually. So we're going to have a long discussion here. And, oh, Bill, would you record too? That
yes. Yeah.
Did I say that already? So, okay.
I don't know, but I'll record.
Okay, so here we go. We're off into the rooms. Open all rooms. Okay.
Welcome, everyone. You'll occasionally see me doing this because I'm moving around just to make sure I can see everyone on the different screens, because I've only got 4 faces on one screen because I'm on a pad. So I do apologize. You see me dangling my arms all over the screenshot. So we have a lively debate ahead of us, hopefully. Would someone like to open, and would someone like to have me reflect, or would someone else like to model the reflections? Maybe Martin, would you like to model the reflections?
I can listen if anyone wants to speak.
Terry.
Okay, thank you, Marta. I'll step into the deep end. 5 minutes, right? Primarily, or anything I want to go on, but certainly I want to go.
You'll see me do this with a phone, and hopefully you should hear a bleeping noise just to give you some idea.
All right.
When you hear that noise, it's time to think about stopping, but you don't have to stop exactly on the noise. Okay.
Gotcha. Okay. I really have 2 things, but I'll save one for another round. I'll start on the fourth demand at the first. And let me just be perfectly transparent. I'm opposed for the time being to having a fourth demand. On one hand, the 3 demands I believe are sufficient to encompass, for instance, the social justice focus. If you look at our values and principles, I think the values and principles explicitly and implicitly provide all the space and platform we need to talk about social justice. What I oppose about the fourth demand as it's emerging in XR-US and has begun to make inroads in other countries is that it's not a fourth demand. It becomes demand 0. If you're not on, in XR-US, if you're not on board with their social justice agenda, they won't let you join. That's not exactly the way it's supposed to go.
Terry.
So am I supposed to allow?
Sorry, Terry. May I? Yeah, if you just let me reflect that much before I
Okay, okay.
That's okay.
Fine.
So what I've heard you say is that you've got two things you want to say, and you'll save one for our next round. And that this first thing is to do with the fourth demand, and you oppose it. You feel like the three demands are themselves sufficient, that they sort of already cover the width of the fourth demand, and that actually fourth demand, the way you see it, that's as much as I got.
You froze up. The way I see it is
that you see fourth demand as demand zero. That's the way XR US is phrasing it. And also you said that was your opinion for now. Yeah, and that might change.
that's good. I feel clearly heard and understood. Is there more I want to say about that? Yeah, I'd like to elaborate a bit on the idea that for now, we don't need a fourth demand. I think the energy, the momentum, the dynamic that we have in the principles and values and the fourth demand, or the three demands as we have them now, have gotten us to where we are, and they provide a landscape for moving forward. Now, in that forward movement, adjusting things may be needed, and that's what my second round topic will address. So I'll pause there.
Okay. So you think that the three demands are enough to create a general landscape in which to operate, and that might change, but that's enough for now. You see, and adjustments might be needed in the future, but so far three demands seem enough.
That's spot on. I feel very clearly heard. And I will yield to you to pick a listener for you to speak.
Dean, may I speak to you?
Certainly, yeah. Certainly, Martin.
I'm very grateful to be here. I'm sort of curious about what I'm going to learn. I suppose I have an instinct that is not grounded in anything. You know, it's not that I know enough to have that instinct, but I have an instinct to say, you know, XRUS has their points and they're not being heard. That's my natural instinct when I heard about this story, but I know too little about it to be properly informed. I'll pause there.
So your instinct is that we probably do need a fourth demand. You're privileged to be here, but you're aware of the fact that you don't necessarily have a deep enough understanding to fully appreciate what the fourth demand may be, and you're looking forward to gaining insights in this listening circle to actually understanding why there is a justification by XR USA for their call for a fourth demand.
I think maybe I didn't articulate it properly. I'm not attached to the fourth demand as much, you know, like it could be 0.5, whatever, you know, and I don't think it, for me, it's not about the demand. It's about understanding that the inequality in the world, the inequalities that have been there since forever and that are very present now and that are going to get worse with climate collapse, that needs to be central to XR's work. You know, fourth demand, no fourth demand, like I don't know enough about any of that, but for me, it's we all here are part of the minority world, and I want the majority world and the interests of the majority world, and that might be hypocritical or come across as hypocritical, you know, but I want that to be front and center for XR.
Okay, so you're not attached to any labels, but you're attached to the sentiment behind the concept that we should actually have justice or equitable justice as the underlying message of the three demands, because although we're majority of white in the meeting, quite a lot of us are aware that there is this imbalance between the North and the South, and we need to address that balance as part of the whole underlying core of the three demands.
Yeah. And so I come into this conversation with a lot of humility, because we only know what we know. And so, but a wish to name that I think to understand XR and its role in the world, me as an individual, I need to do a lot more learning and reading and conversing on how can we decolonize ourselves, how can we, you know, make an equitable movement, all of that. Like in Ireland where I am, we actually have a different demand. Our third demand is different, and it's a just transition. So, you know.
So the concept of the equitable transition and the fact that we don't necessarily are not aware of the inequalities that we actually experience, or sorry, not experience, that we haven't experienced because of our position of where we are. But in Ireland, the third demand is phrased differently that actually encapsulates that already. But you're aware that we need to decolonize ourselves, and there's a lot more work to be done to actually see the bigger problem.
Thank you, Dean. I feel very, very hard.
Thank you. Okay. Can you reflect for me, please? A sec.
Yes, I will. Sure.
Well, I totally empathise with what Martha's just said there. I thought I was enlightened, but I've recently discovered on my travels in the fourth demand working groups in XR that I know very little. I know so little about what actually has really been going on.
You referred to Martha, to what she was saying, and then you said you participated in a circle in a group, and you discovered during this session with your group that you knew very little about what is going on.
Yeah, the group is actually XR Global, and it's a global group where we're talking across the continents, and I'm getting insights to what the other continents are feeling that we are in XR UK not addressing, which is the global injustices that that are not written into what XR UK are saying, because XR UK aren't aware of the injustices, it seems.
The group that you mentioned earlier was XR Global, and that is where you find information from other XR groups across the world, from different continents. And some of those messages that you read indicate that XR UK is not aware of some injustices that happen elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, it seems to me that the XR UK, coming from its privileged position, is sitting in a very isolated worldview of what actually is going on in the world, whereas the rest of the world has had to deal with what's been going on for a long time. We in the West have been removed from the consequences of our monetarist system.
He said that XR UK is or consists of privileged members, and the XR UK were removed from some conflicts that were caused by British monetary or international monetary system, and that the British XR was isolated from those global issues, that it is only now beginning to grasp what is happening.
Yeah, because the monetary system around the world is quite complicated. And I've spent 4 years looking into offshore banking and how the monetary global system works. And I'm only just starting to understand a little tiny part of the spider's web. And the spider's web is very cunningly woven and drafted in very slippery language that makes it hard to pin down any of it.
You're studying the international monetary system, and you're only at the beginning of understanding how it works. But you already know it looks like a spider's web, and it's very intricate and very elaborate, and there's a lot of legal loopholes or legal language and legal expertise.
Yes, it's hidden in legalese, and I'm lucky because I was brought up by a lawyer, so I'm not intimidated by legalese. The moment I see legalese, I jump forward instead of backwards. Oh yes, and rather than back going, oh, I can't understand that. So I count myself blessed, although at the time I thought it was a curse.
You're not deterred by legalese. You don't mind if it's legal language or legal problems because of your background, because you were brought up by a lawyer, and that actually stimulates you. You want to learn more.
Yes, the irony was I refused to go into the family firm. I refused to become a lawyer, and I became a scientist. And actually now that lawyer part of me is proving very useful.
You didn't want to become a lawyer for your family firm. You became a scientist instead. But now all this background, all this information, all this all this knowledge is becoming useful.
Thank you, Jessica. I feel fully heard.
Krista, can you reflect me, please? I'm very happy to be in this circle because just like you were saying, Dean and Marta earlier, we know only as much as we know, and it's very useful for me to have contact to other XR groups from other countries because we're an international movement, and it's so good to hear perspectives from different people. We can't hear you.
Okay. You're happy to be in this circle today, and you also appreciate being in XR because of its international quality, where people from all over the world bring different things because of the variety of circumstances around the world.
Yeah, and some of those circumstances, like Dean was saying, are international. They are part of an international web of relations. Sometimes they're financial, sometimes political, sometimes very, very hidden. And we're only beginning to get to the bottom of these complicated systems of power.
Mm-hmm. So, although we live in different parts of the world, we're all affected by the international system that's tied into finance and banking, all that stuff. And a lot of it is intentionally hard to understand. And it's very important that we all grapple with this, because this kind of elusive system is affecting us all very deeply.
And it affects us all, yes, but in different places, it affects us differently and to a different degree. So I agree that if there should be a fourth demand, it should be about justice, and it should be about putting people and nature before profits, basically. I know it sounds like a slogan, but it's I think it's something so universal that everybody would agree, and we wouldn't have a big quarrel.
Okay, so this international system affects everyone on the planet, but it affects us differently. And some people are very oppressed by it, and others very privileged by it. And we're all somewhere on that spectrum. And yeah, I think.
I'm also interested in this monetary system. I translated subtitles for a documentary, a British documentary, 99% owned, and was about this banking system, this international system of finance. And in my country, it's not very popular, all these connections between the offshore banking and the tax havens. We know this, but it's somehow we feel it only affects the rich elite of our population.
Okay, you worked as a translator for a documentary that had to do with the international banking system. So you're you're interested in this topic, but as a person living in Poland, you feel the people around you, they don't feel directly involved in it all. It's something that they feel it's something that affects the elites, but they don't have this intense interest as perhaps other people around the world, in other parts of the world, or other groups.
Yeah, one last thing, because I'm not sure about the time. Yeah, it's. I was waiting for this. Because we are not aware that we are so much a part of this global financial system, we are defenseless. We don't know who has power over our jobs, over our money, over our future. And we just give all this power away without fighting for it. And that's something we need to change.
So you know that this international banking system yields tremendous power over people, and that a lot of people aren't aware of this, and they need to be aware of it because it's such tremendous power that is oppressive to, I would say, the 99% of the world. You didn't use those words, but.
Yeah, but that's what I meant. Thank you.
Okay. Is it my turn now? Okay. Edwin, will you listen to me?
Mm-hmm. Listening.
Okay. I agree with Terry that I wish we would just stick to the 3 demands, because as a person who was in XRUS, I felt a lot of discord that came from the 4th demand. Although it's well-intentioned, it didn't feel, what's the word that SR uses, self-organized and holacratic. It felt like something that a small group imposed upon the XRUS. Well-intentioned, but not very wise, in my opinion.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you feel that the 3 demands are enough, and that that the 4th demand isn't wise. There's a lot of a small group sort of imposing it on other people, and you would like and it's also inhibiting sort of the holacracy, sort of the organizational structure kind of inhibits or doesn't support that.
Yeah, I feel that Extinction Rebellion made such a splash in the news and people were drawn to it. And then here in the United States, instead of accepting it for what it was, they saw it as a vehicle to give oomph to the groups they were already in. And so instead, what I like about XR is how international it is. And I think that we need to work together, like reinforcing the movement all over the world and not particularizing it to where we live.
So you're seeing that XR, you'd like to keep it the way it is, make it's international and not make it particular to the local situation. And you're seeing that here in the United States that certain groups sort of got a hold of it for their own kind of benefit, or basically.
Yeah, I think they meant well, but
I left out that meaning that you're saying that several times, that you really think that they mean well, but yeah.
Yeah. So the 3rd demand was totally new to me. I had never heard of a citizens assembly. And in fact, I didn't really think about it very much because I was just so impressed by what Extinction Rebellion was doing and thought like, wow, they're really gonna have some progress in the climate movement. And then when I did find out what citizens assemblies are all about, I just have more appreciation for XR, for this, what I think is kind of it's a paradigm shifting strategy.
Yeah, you have real appreciation for XR, then you didn't really understand the 3rd demand, but once you understood it, you really saw that this is a real paradigm shifting sort of a group, and you have a real appreciation for that.
Yeah, and so I feel like the 4th demand, from speaking with people in XR US, they just overlook it. And in fact, one of the people who was very influential in XR US, she said, well, I don't trust that a citizens assembly would ever work here in this country. And so I felt like she wasn't accepting what XR was really about. And I felt like other people in XR US were the same way. They were just overlooking the 3rd demand.
Yes, so someone in XR, didn't even really have trust in the 3rd demand. They said it wouldn't work here, and so you just feel that I'm hearing that the XR US kind of just overlooks and doesn't even kind of really trust the 3rd demand.
Yeah, and I'm very enthusiastic about the 3rd demand because I feel here in the United States we don't have a democracy. I feel like I was brainwashed in my public education that, oh, we have a democracy, we were the first, we're so proud of our democratic country. And it's a pretense. We don't really have a democracy. It was rigged. And we were all brainwashed to think it was, just because there was all this abundance that was available to so many people. But the slave owners, the elites, they've always been controlling the situation. And we don't, as an American, I didn't know the real history of my country, how it has been so undemocratic.
So you feel like you and I guess everyone is brainwashed. Hey, we have a very democratic country here, and then you're just realizing it's not really that democratic, and maybe that's some appreciation for the 3rd demand because it's a democratic building process, and you're kind of have that sort of an awareness now of that.
Yes, I feel heard.
Okay.
My time's up, right?
Yeah, it is. I got a beeper, nice, soft, gentle beeper like that. Terry, can I speak to you? You're muted. Okay, there, yeah. So yeah, my view is pretty extreme in that I think justice has failed. Justice doesn't work. That justice is almost like a problem. Yeah.
I think I hear you pretty clearly. I think that you just feel that justice has failed. That's a pretty strong and extreme claim.
Yeah, it's not really transformative. It just reinforces the status quo. And I think, yeah, so I'm skeptical about justice.
I hear you saying that its failure is in serving and reinforcing the status quo, the business as usual.
Yeah, and
it's the question I would ask: what scope?
No, that you don't get to ask questions. So, so the first thing is it supports individualism. It comes to the truth through competition. It's like you go into a courtroom, and it's like you're going to come to truth through competition. You're going to hire gladiators, called lawyers, and they're going to battle it out to come to some form of truth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The way questions of truth are settled unjustly, as you see it, is that it's a competition and essentially a zero-sum game. And a clear example of this is in the courtroom, where lawyers enter into an arena like gladiators in ancient Rome and battle it out, and one of them wins and one of them loses.
That's right, and then that's the truth, right? It's like, so, and then there's external judgment. You have an external group who's going to judge the right or wrongness of the situation, and finally, the outcome is going to be retribution. The person who kind of lost is going to be punished. So those are just some of the principles, and there's other deeper ones, but I won't go into it. So, yeah.
Other factors that play into this lack of justice or the injustice that you're...
or just a failure of the concept of justice, what we have as a form of justice. It's the justice, it's the sense of what is justice. The concept of justice has failed.
Okay. A failed conception of justice is one in which, as you said, truth is a competition. It's a zero-sum game. I think I interjected that, but as a gladiator battle with a winner and a loser, there's retribution for the loser, which undermines the notion of justice. And there's external judgment.
Right.
That surrounds everybody in the arena gets to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Yeah, and so we have in social justice, it's kind of like, like these countries, they have a right-wing dictatorship, and then there's the left wing says there's this injustice, and then they take over, and then they create their own dictatorship, and then the right is like, hey, that's unjust, we're gonna. So it's just this constant battle of, and so I just see, in that sense, I see social justice is sort of reinforcing that polarized dynamic.
Okay. So this failed conception of justice feeds into a partisan or other kind of polarization that keeps justice constantly a moving target and never able to settle on a valid conception.
It's the concept of justice, like the definition of justice, that is kind of what it is. I mean, that is how people define the term justice. So it's like that concept, I think, has failed and is failing and will fail, and just it's like a constant, never-ending failure.
Okay, so it's not really a moving target. It's settled into a bad definition.
Yeah.
That is apparently deeply entrenched and not likely to change.
And I think the alternative is a culture of empathy. And it is what we are doing here, is like we are listening to each other and talking to each other and hearing each other, and we're going to come to some form of truth through this empathic dialogue.
Just getting my thoughts down so I can stay on track here. Okay. You think the better alternative is what's going on here in this group, if it could be expanded, a culture of empathy in which a better conception of truth would be collaboratively and empathetically determined as opposed to competitively and retributionally.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I feel fully heard. I think that was my time too.
Okay, all right. So does that put me back up as active speaker?
Yes.
Boy, tough choice. I can either pick Kiara, with whom I strongly resonate, or try to take a guess as to who maybe not. How about if I just go back at you, Edwin? Is that okay?
Yep, I'm listening.
There's a question that I've been struggling with that has to do with this XR-US, XR-America schism. And the question is this: how can I trust an organization whose primary leader doesn't obey the first demand?
So you have questions about this schism that, you know, how can you trust the leader who's not following the demands of tell the truth, I guess.
Yeah, tell the truth. You're spot on. You're hearing me very clearly. Now, there's a lot of detail behind that, having to do specifically with we mitigate against power and we don't blame and shame. I think that's number 7 and 8 in the principles and values. And I know that goes back to a previous circle, but it comes into play for me here because on the one hand, I'm not supposed to blame or shame any individual, but there is an individual in XR-US who is not obeying the first command, and they're in a national leadership position. They're not telling the truth. They're a false identity. Their name that they go by is not their real name. They have a second name that they go under, which is also a false identity. And this person is leading XR-US.
So the person that's leading XR-US is using multiple aliases and not telling the truth about their name, and it kind of doesn't fit the principle or demand of tell the truth.
Exactly. And at first, this person directed passive aggression toward me as a local coordinator, and then blackballed me from taking part in national service. And over time, it just got worse and got worse and got worse and got worse. So that's why I left XR-US and went to XR-America.
Okay, so you're kind of explaining why you left XR-US, because this person I think that I can't remember the first word, but you felt you were blackballed from the group. And it was kept getting worse. It just sounds like some kind of dynamic, and it just kept getting worse, and then you were blackballed, and that's why you left.
Right. So to use a concept from philosophy and existentialism, they draw a distinction between good faith and bad faith, right? And for me, XR-US is the bad faith XR in the US, and XR-America is the good faith. And I can say this with some confidence because I've worked pretty closely with both since March of last year. Actually, XR-America only came into being this year, but I worked directly with their core launch team for about 6 weeks back in March and April.
So you're feeling that one group is working with good faith and one is with bad faith, and you've been working with the XR-America, and you feel that they have good faith.
That's clearly understood. Thank you very much. Just last comment, I would say, well, I feel well heard, and I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Then I'll speak to Martha, I guess.
Listening.
Yeah, so from one concern I have is that you see there's couple of people here from XR-America, and the XR-US folks do not show up to empathy, that I know of at least, to empathy circles. So I have concerns about that.
Yeah, so you have concerns that you see people from XR-America taking part in empathy circles, and you've not had people from XR-US join you.
And I reached out, multiple times. I keep kind of reaching out, and we'll keep reaching out, and but I just have concerns to people who will not come into an empathic dialogue. You know, for me, that's I don't know what it is. It's like a problem. It's like, you know, if you're not willing to have an empathic dialogue, you know, I don't know about you know, your organization in terms of something I want to be part of, but I'm willing to listen to you. I'm willing to hear you out. I'm willing to empathize with you, but, you know, am I willing to take part? So.
Yeah, so you have concerns because you you have suspicion, or you know, you feel like you have suspicion, I guess, of people who are not engaging in empathic dialogue, although you're insisting and you're inviting, and so that makes you feel a bit of distrust or some form of
yeah, but I keep trying to reach out and I keep trying to listen. I'm willing to listen. So I just want to be clear that, you know.
Yeah, so you want to be clear that you want to keep being open and insisting and hoping that you'll get through.
And yeah, so in terms of, yeah, the culture of empathy being an alternative to the justice framework, that's what I've been, you know, working on, and I that's kind of where my hope is, you know, moving forward. And I think if an organization can be built around, you know, mutual empathy, mutual listening, I think it can be inclusive. I think that going down the social justice route there's going to be a, you know, sort of a backlash. It's not going to bring people together around the climate change. It's going to create polarization, and we're just going to, we're just going to keep the status quo going.
So what you're saying is that, you know, as you said before, the social justice model doesn't appeal to you. Because justice doesn't really work. You'd rather have it around empathy, and you think that going down the social justice road is just going to lead to backlash, polarization, and not bring change to the status quo.
And there has been attempts to take the justice concept and move it, I would say, from maybe a more authoritarian direction to a more empathic. And that process is called restorative justice. So restorative justice has much of the essence of empathy in it. It says, you know, bring people together, have these empathic dialogues, understand each other, you know, why did someone do an action, hear them out, hear what the consequences and the impact was on it, and see how you can create some form of healing and taking, you know, constructive steps forward that, you know, everybody agrees, you know, with, that sort of signs on for. So I think that is a different model, and that's what kind of the restorative justice has kind of been moving, you know, trying to shift from this justice retribution model towards, I would say, towards a mutually empathic model.
So you're saying that changes to the retributive justice system have already taken place, and there's this model of restorative justice where people do empathic listening and they try to focus on the consequences and the impacts, and they try to move forward after having a degree of understanding and listening to each other.
Yeah.
So it's more going that way.
Yeah, and I would say the culture of empathy is more the puristic version of that. It's like, let's just drop the, you know, that, and let's just create a clear concept and understanding and value system based on empathy. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and so you see the culture of empathy as a more extreme case of it, where it's just then beyond restorative justice into just creating a different kind of culture.
Which I think is revolutionary. That's the true revolution in our culture, is empathizing with each other, listening to each other. That's going to be the real revolution.
What you think is revolutionary, the culture of empathy, which is you hope is going to bring progress.
Yeah, thanks, Martha.
Jacek, may I speak to you?
Yes, of course.
Don't know where to go with this. So in Ireland, we don't have a demand-free citizens assembly. And it's not because we don't like the concept. Ireland is quite evolved in ways of using citizens' assemblies. It's used it many times before, inclusively to hold citizens' assemblies about the climate and ecological crisis. I'll pause there.
In Ireland, you don't have the third demand about the citizens' assembly, but that's happened before. You have conducted this citizens' assembly about the climate and ecological emergency already.
So it happened maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And it was recommendations, they were not binding. And also 2 years ago, or when it, I suppose really it happened longer ago, because those things take a long time to prepare. And by the time people got the information in the assembly, the information they got was already out of date. And so the degree of urgency was not transmitted to the citizens really clearly. And so the recommendations were good. It's not that they weren't bad. But so there were two problems. One, the recommendations weren't strong enough because they didn't have the most up-to-date emergent information, because it wasn't so bad then, right? It gets worse every week. And then, so the information wasn't as strong, and then it was not binding. It was just recommendations.
The Citizens' Assembly in Ireland was 2 years ago. And the decisions that were made were not binding, they were just recommendations. And another problem was that these recommendations were based on information that was already too old, that was not updated, it was out of date. And that's why the recommendations didn't convey this urgency, because the situation is getting worse all the time, but the people didn't get that information on time.
And they're never up to date. Even the IPCC reports, nothing is ever up to date, because the situation is much worse than what we understand. Even our human brains can't compute how bad it is. And then if it gets filtered by scientists for other people to understand, and then by policymakers, and then by politicians, and then citizens hear it with their own fears and filters, right? So I love the concept of citizens' assemblies, and it's not that I think they're useless. I don't think they can deliver what we wish they could. And this is my personal, this is not XR, this is my personal opinion. Unfortunately, I think they're a brilliant idea. I think we need to find other ways.
The information is never up to date. Even the IPCC reports, they are based on older reports, and it takes time before this information from the scientific papers is summed up in another report for the policymakers, and then it takes even more time for the policymakers and politicians to consult the public. And we're always too late with our understanding of the situation. You're not opposed to the idea of citizens' assembly. You like the idea, but you doubt if the citizens' assemblies will bring the change that we need.
Yeah. So for example, the citizens' assembly was very useful here in Ireland for the referendum to do with the abortion, decriminalization of abortion. It was very useful there. Why? I mean, it was a massive, strong thing that had to happen in campaign and all of that behind it. But because the public opinion was ready, then the Citizens' Assembly could reflect that. But if the public opinion isn't ready, the Citizens' Assembly will not be as strong as it needs to be. So I'm not saying, remove it. Yeah. And I'm probably not the best to articulate it, but I don't think it's going to bring all the solutions that we wish it did.
The Citizens' Assembly was very useful with this referendum about abortion in Ireland. And that's because the public opinion was ready for this referendum and for this Citizens' Assembly. And if the population is not ready, the results will not be so good.
Yeah, thank you, Etik. I feel very heard.
Dean, can I talk to you?
Yes, I can.
I agree with Marta about our inability to process what's really happening to the climate emergency and how fast it's progressing. We're always thinking about the information that we received, which is based on some older information.
Yes, you agree with Marta, but we're always working on outdated information.
And I was following discussion online. It is a discussion, a forum of Polish XR members, mostly. And it was about something that I thought I read about 5 years ago. And I thought, come on, this is too old. And this idea, it was discarded 5 years ago. Why are we bringing it back again?
You are in a forum in Poland and you come across an idea you found out about 5 years ago. And basically you were going, why are we still doing this thing from 5 years ago?
But then I thought, maybe I'm not up to date. Maybe there's some new information that I missed. Maybe this is a solution that we should seriously consider. But I'm somehow, I noticed I was not ready to read all these boring papers again about some nuclear power solutions, because I thought that was rubbish.
So your unconscious bias, because
Yeah.
you'd already looked at this problem before, you'd seen these papers and you've gone, well, I've read this before, why should I read it again? But you were open to the fact that maybe if there was some new information, but you didn't want to, as I would say, plow the same furrow again.
And it's, I noticed how this cognitive dissonance works, how unwilling you actually are to be empathic and open to somebody who has different views, and how much it takes to get this, to become ready to listen to someone who disagrees with you.
So yes, you're aware of how this cognitive dissonance works. When we have already formulated a view, it's very hard for someone else's view to be accepted, because we've said, well, I've already got a view of my own and this view is not with my view, so I don't hear this view.
And then if we are discussing climate change, none of us are specialists, so maybe we should focus on something different. And I agree with Edwin, we should focus more on empathy and on understanding our present and how we can be useful and helpful to each other.
So you acknowledge the fact that none of us are climate experts. So maybe what we should be working on is things we are or can become experts in, which is this new way of working, which is empathic listening.
And I started studying resilience and community resilience. And I am thinking of joining a group maybe who will start a farm, an organic farm, and maybe it's a silly idea, but I'm looking forward to meeting those people.
So you've decided to bug out by, no, I apologize. You came across this idea and you investigating this idea of joining an organic farm which works in a different way.
And I think it's very hard to find solutions for these global problems, and we can only find little solutions for our individual and community problems. And it's like this grassroots principle that we should start with ourselves, and I'm trying to do that now.
Okay, it's very hard to get a grasp of the whole global situation, but we can grasp what's happening very close to us. And if we look after what's very close to us, then we can actually achieve something.
Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Krista, could you hear me, please?
Listening.
Yes, I have to concur with everyone, because quite frankly, none of us are experts in this climate stuff. Although I'm an ocean scientist, and I had quite a few modules on climatic systems and harmonics and interactions and synergy. I'm by no means an expert, and even I, as someone that's meant to be able to understand what's going on with these controls and loops and feedback mechanisms, sometimes get confused. So I'll pause.
You agree with what other people in this circle have said, and feel that none of us can understand the complexity and can, speak like the scientists. And you actually are a scientist, and you know firsthand how very complicated it is. And yeah, it's a very complicated topic for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I did numerical modeling, so I can sort of empathize with the modelers as they're trying to build these models for the IPCC reports. And the latest figures that have come out about the 5 degree plus are because they've modeled more correctly interactions between particulates in the atmosphere and clouds. Whereas before they'd just taken an average, now they've actually got enough computing power to look at it in more detail. So we're now getting a different answer. But then again, you'll only get out of them what you put into them. So if you ask a stupid question, you'll get a stupid answer. So this is the problem.
So scientists have always new information about the climate and new ways of measuring things and analyzing, and but yet you have to have an intelligent inquiry, otherwise you get gobbledygook. And so just how complex it is to understand the climate science.
Yeah, the feedback loops and control mechanisms, and we're discovering new ones all the time. And science is not got all the answers. It's most of it's a guessing game, and it's only accepted theory until it's disproved, and then it's discredited, and then suddenly a new theory takes its place. So what one day was a sacred truth, in 10 years' time we'll be looked back and gone, oh, there, that was true then, but no, it's not true.
So there are feedback loops that are hard to be conclusive about, and the theories change, and so science is not something black and white at all. It's changing over time, and a very vast changing subject.
Yeah, and it all plays into this words that I've heard mentioned a few times around the group this evening, which is the truth. And what is truth? And whose truth is true?
So it points to the big question of what is truth, because there is no definitive truth in science. And we're struggling for the truth. We talk about truth, but it's something we can't really get a handle on. Or we can have our individual truth, but as a group, it's hard to come up with the group truth.
Yeah, it's always changing because there's always arguments and counter arguments because of our binary system. It's you're either for it or against it. That's why we need a new system, because the old systems caused the problems, and the new system is the empathic system rather than the attacking system or the gladiatorial system, is another way of putting it.
And even systems of how science are done are changing and have errors in them. So it's not only the science itself, but how we view science is deserving vast attention. It's a huge, huge issue.
Yeah. So the truth is it's a gladiatorial truth, and we need to find a new truth, which is a non-confrontational truth, but a shared truth or an empathic truth.
So truth often becomes like gladiators fighting each other, and truth is something beyond that. But we don't often, or we usually get caught up in the adversarial version of truth, and really truth is something beyond all of that.
Yeah, so we need to develop an empathic truth, hence why we're developing what we are at the moment.
And so truth involves empathy, and that gets closer, that gets to what truth really is through empathy.
Thank you, I feel fully heard.
Let's see, Terry, will you hear me? So I was interested to hear what Marta said, that the citizens' assemblies, although they're a great idea, they were just recommendations, and so they don't have a whole lot of power. I'll pause there.
Okay, Krista, I hear you saying that you were resonating pretty strongly with what Marta was saying, that they're a right, good idea, but in practice, it depends on the dynamic between the group and the public and the group and the government.
And I don't know that I was really agreeing. I just thought it was fascinating to hear firsthand, because there's never been a citizens' assembly in the United States. And I totally support it, because as an American citizen, I'm really frustrated with our politics. It's not democratic. And in this time of the presidential election, which gets all this attention, it's the whole electoral process has so many problems, and there's so much fraud and manipulation and by the powerful, and there's so much cynicism that I feel among my fellow citizens, because they feel like, oh, voting, it's all corrupt. So citizens' assemblies might not be the answer, but this electoral representation that we have sure isn't working either. And so I want to try something different, because I don't see anything working in my country. There's lots of people trying, but the way the two parties control things, I don't see anything getting done. We're just kicking the can down the road and closer to our extinction.
Okay, I muted so you wouldn't hear me typing. When I said resonated, I didn't mean to imply that you agreed. I just meant that it kind of, gave you food for thought. And your thinking has left you very frustrated with American politics, U.S. American politics in particular, regarding the electoral process as it exists today has been manipulated, undermined, it's fraudulent, it's off course, it's just not doing the job it was meant to do. If you look, for example, at the Constitution. Citizens' assemblies may not be the answer as you see it, but U.S. politics is certainly failing to be an answer. And in your mind, as you see it, it's just kicking the can down the road closer to extinction.
So I want to give Citizens Assembly a try here, and on however we can, because I think that's what distinguishes Extinction Rebellion from all the other climate groups that I'm aware of. And I like it because it's this affirmation of democracy when we are so lacking in democracy. And, you know, so I think it's this, like I said earlier, a paradigm shifting idea that, oh, wow, we could do democracy now. I'm not sure we ever have done it.
So, kicking the can down the road, you very much would like to see citizens' assemblies tried out here in the U.S. And you see it as being distinctive of XR relative to other climate action groups, let's say 350.org, Fridays for Future, and so on. And what really excites you about it is that it affirms democracy in a way that is missing today, especially in the U.S. What you see it is as a paradigm shift towards what I would call a good faith democracy as opposed to the bad faith democracy that we're living in today.
And because I think the climate issue is so broad, it does touch on, it is intersectional with racism, militarism, you know, like Martin Luther King said 50 years ago that capitalism is the three pillars of racism, poverty, and militarism. And I think climate change it's all wrapped up in all of that. And the fourth demand that XR US put out, I feel like it just kind of more emphasizes the racism, whereas the climate problem is connected to so many other problems too. And there's no way we could list that the extent of the problem in our demands. So that's why I like the Citizens Assembly, because it's acknowledging that we don't have a democracy to deal with all of our problems.
I was still muted. You see the climate issue as being very broad, sort of an umbrella, if you will, under which what Martin Luther King identified as the three pillars of racism, militarism, and I missed the third one. But anyway, poverty, exactly, yes, racism, poverty, and militarism. So you see the climate issue, or the climate issue, as an umbrella under which all of those three pillars and the capitalism that uphold them are addressed, or at least in potential could be addressed better than we're addressing them today.
I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay. Edwin, is it okay if I go back to you again?
Listening.
Okay. I was really resonating with what Dean was saying, because it's fascinating to see how this conversation, in the way it's circled, has spiraled in on scientific truth. And even deeper, it's gone into the philosophical notion of what is truth. That's a question as old as Pontius Pilate, right? And science is just one answer to that. Pause.
So you're resonating with what Dean said about kind of coming into science, looking at what science is, looking at the deeper issues of truth, kind of the philosophy of truth. And so you just find it sort of fascinating, the kind of direction this has gone.
Yes, that's right where I'm coming from. To drill into that a little more, because philosophy is what I do. I've been in philosophy for going on 50 years now. So with respect to the science, and there are three dimensions to science, at least. There are lots. And I'm not talking about specific fields like biology, chemistry, physics, etc. I'm just talking about three perspectives on any of those fields. And one is the practice of a scientific model. You have a model of what we do: observation, classification, generalization. That's some of the parameters around today's model. But those models rest on a philosophy of science. They're different things. The philosophy of science determines how rational the model is for science. So I would say we have a problem that goes all the way down to the depth of the philosophical model of 21st century science. Pause.
Okay, so you've been working with in philosophy for, I think you said 40 years, and that there's sort of this model of science and how science works, but it's built on certain deeper premises, philosophical premises, and you're saying that you really need to get to those premises because the problems are really deep and need to kind of address it at that deeper level.
Exactly. Spot on. I must be speaking more clearly than I usually do.
So you really feel heard and you're just thinking, maybe you're really expressing yourself well.
Yeah, very much so. I'm going to mention two names worth looking into from this perspective, which I imagine Dean is familiar with at least one of them, and most of us perhaps with Thomas Kuhn, K-U-H-N. The scientific revolution and paradigm shift concepts come out of that from the mid-60s. And the other is Karl Popper, who describes our science as being pillars or piles driven into a swamp of mystery. And science becomes those structures that we build on those pillars. The philosophy of science is the pillar or pillars. The model of science we built on those pillars is today the paradigm that's been around since relativity theory broke the ice at the early 20th century. And the whole world of science kind of readjusted to that new paradigm. We are way overdue for a new paradigm. If we'd gotten the right, just ask yourself, how rational a science would bring us to where we are today? Pause.
Okay, so you're saying that the science, there's a sort of a model for the science, a structure, and it rests on pillars. They're sort of in a human sense of chaos and morass or swamp or something. You have these pillars, and that maybe underlying premises. Then there's the model, and that model is not rational because it's bringing us to destruction. So maybe we need to reevaluate the models that were, and maybe even those pillars that were built, all this is built on.
Exactly. We're overdue for a Kuhnian revolution is a good way to summarize that.
Okay, so it needs a shift, a Kuhnian shift, revolution of the model.
Yes. And that pretty well makes me well heard on this topic.
Okay, so you feel really well heard on this. Yeah, so, okay. Then Dean, can I speak to you then?
Certainly.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, that model, we sort of operate from different models, and like I was mentioning, the justice system is based on, a model too, and that's what I was sort of critiquing, saying, hey, that model of justice is not really working well. Besides putting 2.5 million people in jail here in the United States, it's not working really.
So the model of justice, and all models need to be called into account, because the model of justice, especially in the United States, isn't really working because there's over 2.5 million people in prison.
Yeah, so it's the same thing as Terry's talking about. What are the models we're operating from? And we need sort of new models. And I'm looking at, can we place empathy as being one of those pillars, right? That we're creating a new pillar, and empathy is one of those new pillars of the new model, which is that, we really put an emphasis on fostering this mutual dialogue and listening to each other.
So Terry brought into the conversation the idea that things are built on models. You've then built upon it by saying that we actually need a new model because the old model is not working. And you're thinking that one of these new pillars of the new model system could be this empathy or empathic listening process.
Yeah, or empathy in general. Yeah, this empath, what we're doing here is a really good first step, and there can be other tools built around this, other practices to support mutual understanding. But the larger empathy is being one of those pillars. This being one of the sort of the practices that's kind of helps support it.
Okay, so the practice we're currently doing at the moment is just the starting point. And empathy itself, the bigger, broader concept, is one of the pillars that we will build upon other supportive models that will work with each other rather than against each other.
Yeah, so for example, the topic of racism, anti-racism, so forth. I see racism as a form of judgment, right? When we judge each other by the color of our skin, that's one form of judgment. Your sense of worth. It's just a form of, there's a deeper concept of judgment under racism.
So we're going back to the fact that racism is a judgment system that allows us to then put people into different brackets, such as I'm of white skin, you're not of white skin, therefore you're of a different race to me.
Yeah, and ethnicity is another form of judgment. My mother my folks were from sort of the eastern part of, Eastern Germany. I mean, what do you call it? East Prussia and Poland. So we have, Poland representatives. So we had the ethnic Poles, the Germans, the Jews, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and they didn't get along very well. I mean, it was like, you think America's got problems. That's what a nightmare is what happened in Europe and in Poland. So that is, we're talking about 26 million, Russians dead, 9 million Jews. I mean, just, I don't know how many Poles, but that is a nightmare.
So there's also beyond racism, which is ethnicity, and your ethnic roots resonated in this group because there's a Pole in this group and there's other people in this group. And that eastern part of the Asiatic continent or Europe is always had problems because you've got the Jews, you've got the Slavs, you've got the Germans, you've got the Russians. The figures of the amount of people that were killed, there was 21 million Russians, 6 million Jews, innumerable Poles. It's just been I would use two words that I can't say here, but
bloodbath.
It's like one beginning with F. Yes, bloodbath. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was also based on judgment, right? So there you have the ethnic judgment. We have, there's judgment if you're bald or got a lot of hair. We judge each other, to a lot of different ways. If you're a man or woman, women were being judged, saying you're not worthy to have the vote or something. So that's another form of judgment. So I would say that a deeper premise of racism is judgment, and that judgment blocks empathy, that is a block to empathic connection. So for me, the whole racism thing goes kind of deeper to dealing with judgment and how judgment blocks empathy.
Okay, so we're all very judgmental, and we all like to compartmentalize things, such as you're women, therefore you shouldn't have the vote, or you're this and you're not me, so therefore you're not like me, so therefore you're different to me. And all that's doing is dividing us and stopping us from working together or actually being empathic with each other.
Yeah, so that premise, again, the empathy and kind of addressing all these issues, and also being against racism is judging. We're judging people for being racist. So it's more of the same. It's like judgment and then judging people for being judgmental, and then judging those people for judging the judgers. I mean, it's a whole crazy mess of judgment. It seems we're just like judging the living daylights out of each other. So I don't want to judge the judgers. I want to empathize with the judgers.
So I'm hearing from you a lot of judgments about judgments being judgmental, and all this judging is actually blocking their empathy. So we need to stop judging each other, or else we'll never actually get away from judgment.
Yeah. So it's trying to empathize with each other, I think, is the path forward. You know, no matter where you're coming from, no matter what you think, let me see if I can hear where you are.
Okay, so no matter where you're coming from or where you've been, the judging is stopping us from forming empathy.
I feel heard. Thank you.
Wow, what a lot of judging. Divide and conquer. Jacek, seeing as we've just been talking about Poland, it's made me want to reach out to you.
I'm listening.
Come on. The fourth demand. What is it? What should it be? When was it? Who is it? Who's going to benefit from it? Yet again, judgments. This judging, dividing, conquering is all part of the control mechanism that keeps us against each other instead of with each other.
Even discussions about the fourth demand are based on judgments and control mechanisms that keep us apart and prevent us from cooperating, listening to each other.
Yeah, so if I was to have a fourth demand, it would be no more demands. Because demanding something doesn't actually work. You've got to empathize with someone and work with people rather than telling them what they can or can't do, because that's been the problem. Once you draw a line, rather than actually being fluid with each other, then you've got a point of confrontation, and we need to remove these points of confrontation and just bend with each other and be flexible.
Your suggestion for the fourth demand would be no more demands. You don't believe in demands, and you think they are confrontational, and we should do something different instead. We should empathize and work with people instead of telling them what to do. So demands are not flexible.
Yeah, although I do believe in a just transition and making sure that we have an equitable transition rather than equal transition. And I do believe we should make recompenses for the injustices that have been done previously. That would involve, in my mind, actually clawing back the money from all the slave owners that got paid out and they've only just recently finished being paid off. But that's just my own personal judgment.
You do believe in just transition, and you think it should be equitable instead of equal. Is that right? Equitable instead of equal. And one specific idea that you suggested was pulling this money that slave owners got from the British public, but taking this money from them, but I'm not sure what to do with them.
It's just part of the problem. The fact that for so long, so much has been given to so few. And it's about time that we didn't let these capitalists get away with their capitalization of everything, because we're not capital, we're people, we're not commodities. We're entities that need love and affection. You take us away from our race, you take away all our leaders, we're all the same. We just want to have our families and our security, food, clothes and shelter, and happiness. Although, what's happiness?
Because in history, very few people were given a lot of money and a lot of power for a long time. They have capitalized all this power, And you say it's time for this commodification of people to finish, because we are not commodities, we are not capital, we are human beings, and we have our basic needs that are universal, regardless of where you come from.
Yeah, so we need to stop allowing ourselves to be divided, because all of our so-called democracies are failed democracies. They're not democracies at all. They're just the illusions of, oh, I put a cross on a bit of paper every 4 years, therefore, oh, this other person speaks for me. No.
We need to get rid of our divisions, and we need to reform our democratic systems, because the current voting system, putting a cross every 4 years is not enough. And this is not true democracy.
Yeah,
it's an illusion of democracy.
Yeah, thank you. I feel fully heard.
Terry, can I speak to you?
Absolutely.
The fourth demand, or the fifth demand, or no demands. This is a great opening for the discussion, but we all have talked about so many different things. It's getting richer and richer, the conversation. I'll make a pause.
Sorry, I just hate to hear keys clacking, so I'll try to mute when I take notes. I hear you saying that this fourth demand entree into this session provided a great opening for a wide-ranging discussion within that perspective. And I think you appreciate that by opening questions like fourth demand, fifth demand, no demand.
And I've also noticed that even though we had different opinions about the wording of the fourth demand, or whether there should be a fourth demand, we all basically agree on the important issues, on justice, on opposing false beliefs, or looking for new ideas and new paradigms.
Okay. You acknowledge that although our opinions differ, which is a healthy acknowledgement, we agree on what appear to be the key, crucial, important issues, the pillars, if you will, like justice, opposing false beliefs, looking for new paradigms, looking for new pilings.
And I think it's easier to come to an agreement if the discussion is not very rigid, like if there's more inclusivity of other topics that may relate to the original idea or the original proposition. So this is, for me, part of this empathy is being able to change the subject.
You find that it's easier for us to come to agreement when discussions aren't rigid or exclusive, but when they become flexible and inclusive, bridging a range of topics that are more or less related to the primary topic.
However, for practical reasons, if we have citizens' assemblies, or if we have elected politicians and we want them to make some decisions, or we want to make decisions ourselves as citizens, we really need to define some text, agree on a text. And there will always be confrontation and quarrels before such agreement is reached.
Okay. However, if citizens' assemblies or politicians or just in any gathering of people, there have to be some text, some sort of guidelines, if you will, or criteria to avoid disruption through confrontation and quarrels, which are inevitable.
And sometimes this agreement is so weak because everybody had to have a say, and everybody's interests had to be represented and taken into account. But that's because the idea of interests and defending all those advantages that you want for yourself or for your country or for your group, and not for the other members of this committee or whatever group. That's why what makes the system ineffective. We focus on individual interests instead of common interests.
Given that the differences and quarrels and confrontations are inevitable, what I understood you to be saying what we need to be wary of is how narrow or or tight interests and benefits and advantages seen from a particular perspective tend to disrupt or derail the common or the shared interest that ought to be the focus.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go to Marta.
Listening, Terry.
I'm going to kind of pivot what I was saying about science before, looking at a completely different thing from the same perspective. I want to go back to the idea of mystery, a swamp of mystery, piles rising out of it, models and structures being built on it, okay? Before I talked about science being those models and structures, specifically models for practicing empirical science. Let me pause there, make sure I'm clear.
Okay, so you want to go back to the models you were speaking about earlier, and yeah, so you're going back to building a structure from a swamp where you can put things on it, and specifically you're talking about the mystery, yeah, emerging from that.
Right. Yes, very good. Because the science is one answer to what is the truth. And if you're a realist, as opposed to an idealist or other things, if you're a realist, you have to confess that there's a truth out there. There's just this big gap of mystery between our cognitive capabilities and getting to that real truth of the universe and its causal laws. Pause.
So you're saying that if you're a realist, you think that the truth is a real, concrete, absolute thing. It's just that we haven't gotten there yet because there's mystery between us and that we can't see it.
99%, I would take the word yet out of there. I don't think we'll ever get there because we're finite beings with finite cognitive capabilities. So we're always going to be dealing with mystery scientifically.
So now, it's the way you see it, it's always going to be an approximation because of our own limitations as human beings, that we won't ever be able to get there.
Exactly. So here's the pivot. Let's switch from science to spirituality. And let me say first that that's one of the things that draws me into these circles. I've only been a couple, 3 times, but the sense that you can evolve personally and collectively, both intellectually and intuitively and spiritually in these dialogues. That's what drew me into these dialogues. Pause.
So you want to apply the same system to spirituality that you're talking about, and it's one of the things that attracts you to these circles is that there's all these components. There's a discourse, but then there's also the spiritual and the emotional. There's various layers to it.
Yes, that's fine. Having said that, and I have to put this caveat in front of what I'm about to say, I mentioned earlier that I am a Christian. That is probably one of the top 10 most baggage-loaded words in the English language, okay? So let me be clear that I am a dissident, if not an anarchist Christian. I want nothing to do with mainstream Christianity, nothing whatsoever, okay? I have my own, I worked out, I just did my dissertation and worked out my own simple faith and my overwhelmingly systematic theology, and therein lies my Christianity. And it was in a seminary, so it has some credibility. Pause.
So you're making it clear that you've actually even done a dissertation on this, that when you say Christian, it does not imply all the structures and all the assumptions that one might make of what that means to you. You've actually looked into it deeply, and you'd say you're sort of an anarchic kind of Christian. You've got your own way of looking at it, but there's still elements that you hold.
In the way I carry on discourse, you just scored what's called a triple Yahtzee or bingo. You nailed it. Now, after my first 9 months with XRUS, before I got to XR America, I kept bumping into this limit of what was going on, and the limit was spirituality. It was all about get in the streets, be an activist, know how to give the talk, you know, and which is not unhealthy. That's great stuff. And it definitely has a top tier, top shelf place in what's going on. But until I began to see things like these circles emerging, I just didn't see much of that, which is what drove me to Deep Adaptation, Jim Bendel's group, which is where I found the other side of the movement around the climate crisis we're in. And that brings the spiritual component into it the same way these circles do. Pause. Done.
Yeah, so for the first 9 months that you were involved with XRUS, it was, you know, the environment around was very much about activism, learning to do the talk and all these very practical activist things. And there was this spiritual component, you know, that you experience here that was lacking for you. And then you were able to reach out and find that in the Deep Adaptation group from Jim Bendel, and yeah, that was lacking for you before then.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you. I did hear the beeper, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll speak to Krista. That's okay.
Okay, listening.
There's so much that I think I'm just going to name things just so I said them, rather than actually. I have a very deep, different understanding from justice than Edwin does. And actually I'd like to explore that one day. So for me, the way I understand justice for me is like, not the justice system, right? I make that distinction between the justice system that is different in each country and context from the concept of justice. And for me, justice, the way I see it, is understanding, a better understanding of something and action based on that clearer understanding.
Okay, you have a lot of thoughts and too many to mention, but justice is a really important thing that's come up in this conversation, and you see it differently than the way Edwin talked about it. And you recognize there's a justice system, but there's justice beyond that. And I don't know.
Yeah. So, you know, justice as a concept for me is understanding something, right? Clarifying, and then action based on that understanding. And for me, and what Edwin was saying, well, we don't need justice, all we need is a culture of empathy. Well, a culture of empathy is very nice, but it doesn't have this element of action attached to it. I can empathize with people and remain very comfortable in my own corner. So it's like we're replacing the understanding with empathy, which is great, but we still need the action part. We still need to repair the inequalities, for example, rather than go, oh, I recognize the inequalities, I understand, I empathize with you, but then I stay comfortable in my corner.
Okay, so justice is very important, and it involves taking action because there's been so much injustice that needs to be addressed, and that requires very definite action. So although empathy is good and we need to listen to each other, we can't do just that. We can't ignore these severe injustices. And so we need some structure to deal with injustice.
And also, like, I don't know, I'm not in America, right? I'm not in the US. So I don't know, but I can intuitively see many reasons of why XRUS would not be tempted to engage in these empathy circles. At first anyway, the way they've been presented so far, because, I don't know if I can, I probably need more time to articulate that, but there needs to be a certain humbleness to actually hear them. I'm not saying about the demand, about all of that. I think they need to feel, and I'm generalizing, that they're actually going to be heard. There's an actual interest in learning from them, that it's an equal relationship. We're all going to learn from each other and grow and understand. And I'm not talking, there might be people that have positions of power, all those things. I don't know anything about that. But it doesn't feel like if they were coming into these circles that Edwin organized, that it would be an equal situation, is my intuitive sense of it.
Okay. Your intuition tells you that there's a reason, an important reason why the people from XRUS have not entered these empathy circles, and that they have a strong need to be heard, and we should be listening to them. And for some reason, they're not feeling comfortable to come into the circle, but we do need to hear them because their position is important and it needs to be heard.
I'll just add, for me, it's not so much them and us. It's like, within each group, there's lots of different voices and different personalities. And I'll just add, like, even when I first heard that there was a group called XR America, just like, why not, United States of America? Because, like, XR America, like, that's a whole double continent. So I was quite shocked, especially that, like, what about Brazil and Argentina, and like, were they consulted? Like, for me, that's incredibly problematic. And so again, those voices haven't been heard. And like, if we were to invite them into this conversation, they would have to be the ones justifying. And again, it wouldn't be an equal conversation, and it wouldn't happen in their language, for example. Like, there's just all these, it's complex. I'd like us to have more of these conversations.
Okay.
But just saying they're not coming, I'm inviting, they're not coming, that's really simplistic from where I sit.
So you feel there's been some judgment about the people in XRUS, that they haven't come to these circles, and there's a reason why they haven't come, and we need to hear them. And you feel some uncomfortable with the XR America group. It's presumptuous that they are representing all of America. And let's see, you feel there needs to be more we need to bring them in to the discussion more, the other voices that are a part of America.
Thank you so very much, Krista. Thank you. You're very heard.
Okay, that was the time. We're just at the top of the hour, so I hit the button. We've got about 16 seconds, and we're going to be going back to the full group. So thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed the conversation.
It's lovely meeting you.
Thank you for attending.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Do we miss a few people here, or do we have everyone?
One left our group.
Oh, okay. Let me just check the rooms. Oh, I see. Okay. So you just want to take, I guess we have up to 2 minutes to just to debrief how the group went for you. What was the demand, if any, that you came up with? I don't know, Dean, would you be willing to start and then call on people to, and time keep for, I guess, 2 minutes? Should do it.
I've just switched my timer off. I'll just switch to the other timer. Hang on.
Oh, are you able to see people, or?
No, but it's okay. I can keep the time. I'm prepared to keep the time. I just can't call upon people because I haven't
Okay.
to. I'll start
Bill?
Start it. Go
Oh,
on.
do you want to do it?
I'm sorry. Do you want
Would
me to
you call on people to?
Please,
right.
Bill.
Dean.
I'm still trying to get the timer sorted. Right. Okay. I've got the time.
Okay, let's give you some time.
No, got it now. Got it now. 2 minutes.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay,
Yes.
go ahead, please.
So we went around and round on the fourth demand. And of course, as with these groups, we tend to go in a spiral. So we start off from one place and we walk around the topic, and then we get to a really deep understanding and deep intuitive cultural resonances. And then we come back to a new understanding. And is the way with these things, at the very end, there was a really salient point that we could have carried on the discussion, and hopefully we will next week. And that was about the global story, and about hearing the global story in the native tongue. We have the advantage that we speak English, and it's an international language, so therefore the argument is already loaded in our favor. So there's this bias already. And really, we need to work on our biases before we tell other people how to work on theirs. So I think my fourth demand is there shouldn't be any demands, but in reality, we do need equity and reparation for any damage done. And that would be the fourth demand if I had one.
Thanks, Dean. Katie?
Yeah, hi. We talked about, I suppose for me, what I've taken from it is we took the different energies, so the energies, destructive energy and love, and how love can overcome destructive energy. And that's what I'm going to take from it, I think. That where there's a lot of grief in our culture, there's also a lot of love. And it's not always exposed, that side of it, within the media and within society. So we have to dig it out ourselves and expose it. So that's I'm holding that. That was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Maureen?
Yeah, I suppose what I'm taking from it is that at the global level, and taking on actions can be very disappointing and frustrating at times. But acting locally is a source of encouragement, like growing your own food, eating it, protecting the biodiversity around one, enjoying the nature, which is very local. So I'm taking away like that, acting locally. and then thinking globally, keeping in mind how our actions are affecting other people around the globe, and making that connection in what we wear, in what we eat, in what goes into our phones, in what we, how we drive our cars, that kind of thing. Thinking globally and acting locally. That empowers me. That's what I'm taking from it. Thank you.
Okay. Krista?
Okay. I got a lot out of our discussion. It was very deep. And what's really sticking with me right now is how we delved into what is justice even, and what does that word mean, and how do we practice justice? And often it's in a very incomplete way. I resonate with that. I definitely feel in my country there's so much false justice or incomplete justice. And I think it would be good for the word justice and equity, because equity is such an important aspect of justice, to be somewhere in the demands. For me, that's never been necessary because I feel it is implied in the Citizens Assembly. But for most people, when they read the demands, maybe they need to see those words, justice and equity. And we can't summarize what justice is and totally lay it out, but maybe those two words should be in the demands somewhere. Check.
Okay. Marta?
Yeah, it was a lovely circle. It's always refreshing to meet new people and consider things differently. It's particularly nice to revisit how science is a concept in a way, and an all evolving concept, and so that when we say tell the truth, you know, our intention is clear, but what that means is always imprecise, because it's an approximation to reality and it keeps shifting and changing. And so what I'm left with is, how can we make that clearer to people so that it helps them in grappling with the enormity of the climate catastrophe? You know, is there a way, a visual way, or some way of making it that it's an approximation system clearer, so people can relate to it, even from a spiritual perspective maybe, but that just they find a way of relating to the information better. Thank you.
Sure. Terry?
Thank you. Appreciate it, Bill. Let me just answer the question at the outset, and then I'll take the remainder of my minute or two here to just kind of encapsulate some thoughts. I don't think we need a fourth demand. I do agree with others who, even in this session, have said we should build justice, equitability, and reparations into the existing demands. And I think number 2, Act Now, is specifically where that could be built in, because it's the one that calls for a transition most explicitly. So if you just qualified that transition in demand number 2 to include a just, equitable transition with reparations, we'd have what the fourth demand from XR-US, XR America even, and XR more generally is trying to achieve in social justice. Now I'm going to wax philosophical here for a minute, because our conversation drove deeply into philosophy, and I tend to live in that world. What we believe and what we know as human beings with finite lives and finite cognitive capabilities can be envisioned or understood or metaphorically grasped as pilings driven into a swamp of mystery. Being finite, there's always going to be mystery. The best we can do is to say, okay, I'm going to drive these things down into that swamp, knowing we're never going to hit a firm foundation. All we do is drive them in just deep enough to where they'll hold up the systems and the structures of the beliefs that we hold and the things we claim to know. Okay. Now, there are several kinds of structures built on several different kinds of pilings, and I'm going to name three. One is science, another is religion, or spirituality more generally, and another is practicality. Because what's practical, you don't always get that out of science. And what's spiritual, you're probably not going to get out of science or practicality, et cetera, et cetera. So they're kind of intersecting, but I don't mean that set theoretically. They're kind of correlated to each other, but they are largely kind of contrary or mutually exclusive. My point being that we have to find empathetic connections between those three domains of our being and presence on earth. We're here scientifically, we're here practically, and we're here spiritually. You can deny that, but then you're going to be a humanist, which is fine. There is a human spirituality. Our thoughts are metaphysical. That's a spiritual claim. So seeking that empathetic resonant harmony from one of those structures to the other is where I think our hearts need to be with our souls and our minds and our cognitive powers and strengths. Done.
Thanks, Terry. Jacek.
I enjoyed our conversation in the circle very much. We discussed fundamental truths. We even discussed what truth really was, how we defined it, and we talked about our limits to coming to terms with the truth about social injustices and the climate catastrophe. And we were exploring some possibilities of bridging those gaps in our understanding. And we especially talked about empathy and how it can help us, help our understanding become fuller and help us reach this justice, a better system. Thank you.
Thank you. Edwin?
As you noticed, we had Terry in our group and philosopher, and his metaphor of, these systems built on these pilings in the mystery and in the swamp. I'm kind of just sitting with that sort of that image and really appreciating it. And I appreciated what he said about the empathy being the way to, talk between these different systems. And that in terms of a fourth demand, for me, it is that empathy, would be to have a culture of empathy. So a culture based and structured and supporting that empathic connection. So that was sort of the core. I did hear a criticism of that, saying, oh, well, empathy, we all hear each other, but where's the action component? So I would create the term empathic action, which is out there. So with empathic action, if you do mediation, if you ever done conflict mediation, the first thing is you try to bring the parties together and you try to find out the mutual understanding about what the issue was. And then you ask, well, how would you like to go forward together? What is the agreement? What are you kind of offering? What are you requesting? And there's an empathic dialogue about what the action is going to be. So the empathy is very part of, coming together to agree on some sort of an action going forward. So I think it really, that it kind of extends to action as well. So it was a great conversation. I just love bringing up all these topics, exploring them. And for me, it's always that driving that pile, Terry, you're talking about, but that pile is empathy, and how do we build the structures up around that? So I really appreciate that metaphor. Yeah.
Thanks, Edwin. Sarah?
I guess I would include in the demands to hold a space for the intersectionality of all this, of social justice issues, as well as seeing the interconnectedness of all environmental issues. I had kind of an aha moment regarding the issue of trees in the UK and how the ancient forests are being chopped down for infrastructure. We also had an amazing conversation just about these transformative times and how things are kind of reaching a critical point where it seems like, again, a great turning, a great unraveling, and maybe a collapse of society might have to happen. But we are also seeing all these movements like Me Too, Black Lives Matter coming to the surface because social justice needs to be righted. And we also were really unpacking the importance of staying local, being empowered by being local, and how that can really save our climate by reducing the carbon emissions, by growing our own garden. We also spoke about exploitation in third world countries by banks funding the exploitation of big oil, which is devastating African countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Maureen? Hi. Did you go already? Oh, I'm sorry. Your picture moved, so okay. Well, I was really touched by it was very complex. It felt very heavy, and I certainly weighed it down. But I was really Katie came up with the metaphor of there was an oak that white leafed oak that was burnt down, and then there was a new sprig that came up, a new baby tree. And that sort of was a metaphor for where we are. And I think that we underestimate the power we do have to change things when we cooperate and listen to each other. I think that empathic listening, or that type, is an essential first step. And then I like what Edwin said about empathic action, because if we don't act in accordance with our discussions, then we lose trust in the dialogue. And that's for me. Edwin.
Okay, thanks, Bill and everyone. So yeah, what do we have for next week? It's the same topic. We'll continue with the next topic. And after that, the following week, the whole series is going to start again. The Australians there's an Australian group that's going to be restarting this series, and it will be at a different time. It'll be like 1 a.m. Pacific time, so it's not going to be really optimized for the US. It's going to be more for Australia, Asia, Middle East, Africa, and Europe. So to give them the chance to go through this process, to go through this. So I'm pretty excited about that too. In terms of next steps, we'd love to have you take part in more empathy circles. We hold multiple circles. At the top of the document that I put in there, the link, there's a link to upcoming empathy cafes. You click on that and you can see the list. And one of those is empathy training that you can take part in. On Tuesday, there's a sort of an intro to the empathy training, an empathy cafe, for becoming a facilitator. And yeah, I hope you kind of stay involved and kind of learn the process and hold circles in your own community, in your own XR groups and families and so forth, and sort of spread the practice and the underlying mindset. So with that, we've come to the end. Thank you. And if the facilitators want to stay just to debrief, we have a little debrief at the end just to see how the facilitation went. And hope to see you next week or in the empathy circle training. It'd be great to see you there. So take care.